Okay, welcome back. Now, as beautiful as our output log is, our player can't actually see anything, so we need to add some UI elements. To do that, we can right-click, go to User Interface, choose Widget Blueprint. A widget is just a UI element, so let's call this first one W standing for widget, underscore dialog. This is going to contain our dialog text, our characters, backgrounds, etc., and our options. Speaking of options, we need to make a user interface for that. W underscore dialog options. This is just going to be our button that we click on to choose an option, basically. Before we begin, I'd also like to note that I added a few lines to our script. After we ask, have you made a visual novel before, we asked, who's best girl? Our choices are L2. The response to that is that show got really bad at the end, QQ. Violet Evergarden, he actually stayed awake through that show. And Cantor-chan, that was a Giga joke. Giga is a YouTuber, in case you don't know. In case you're wondering why I'm using last season's carols, it's because I'm not caught up on this season yet. So let me save these really quick. Save, right click and save. In our dialog, if we double click it, it brings us to our widgets editor. This is one of the things I really like about Unreal compared to Ren'Py, is that in Ren'Py, if you want to add UI elements, you sort of have to guess where you want the elements to go and how it's going to look. However, in Unreal, you can just see what it's going to look like. This blue border over here represents our screen. So let's add a border. And this is going to hold our text for our dialogue. I'm going to change the anchor to, say, the bottom. What changing the anchor does, for the purposes of this video at least, it just changes what these numbers are and makes it easier to work with in certain cases. So for example, I want this to be at the bottom, I want it to be at the center also, so I changed it to the center bottom. So position X is going to be 0 because it's position X is going to be 0. Sorry, alignment, also want this to be 0.5, so I want it to be at the center. Position Y, let's make it something like negative 350. Sure. Size X, this is going to be the size of your image, basically. That's going to be used for your text border. Let's make this 1500. And the size Y is going to be the height of the image, so I like 300. That looks good to me. This is also really bright, so let's change the color. Make sure you do not change the color content, color, and opacity, by the way, because that's going to screw a lot of things up. Let me show you actually what that's going to screw up. So if we give it a child, let's give it a text child, because we're going to give it a text child anyways. Well, we can't actually see anything, but if we change the color and opacity of this, you'll notice that the text turns red. It's changing the color of the content of our border instead of the actual border. So don't change the color and opacity, content color and opacity of our text border, just making sure you remember that. Instead, you would go down to your appearance, brush, and brush color, I believe. Yeah, brush color. Let's make it a little darker. Obviously, if you're using an image of your own, you would instead, sorry, that's text box. You would instead go to your brush, image, and choose an image. So if you were using this, for example, as your text border, you would do that. Clear that out, so we go back to this. Let's go to our text block. Now, you might notice that there are two text blocks in Unreal. There is the rich text block and the text. A text box, by the way, is just something that allows the user to type into. So obviously, we're not going to be using this to show our text. A rich text block is new to Unreal 420. So if you're using a version of Unreal that's before 420, this won't be here, so you don't have to worry about it. What it does is it allows you to have multiple styles of text in your text block. For example, right now, if we want our text to be different colors, for example, if we want text to be white and block to be red, we can't do that with the normal text box or text. You have to use the rich text block to do that. We're actually going to be switching to using the rich text block in the next episode because this video is already going to be pretty long. The reason for that is because I'm not just going to show you exactly what we're going to need to do, the end result. Instead, I'm going to show you a little by little. We're going to do something, we're going to show you what's wrong with what we did, and then we're going to fix it. And we're gonna repeat that until we eventually get to what we should be doing. I just personally believe that's a better way of teaching how to do things instead of just showing you what the end result should be. So in our text block, this is really close to the border, so let's change the padding to something like I don't know, 16? Nah, that's a little small still. Let's go 32. Sure, I like that. The other option you could do instead of changing the padding is go to your appearance margin and change that. So if we add 32 to that, now there's a margin in between here. The reason I don't use margin and I use padding instead is because padding is used basically everywhere, where you would have a what's the word, parent of your widget, whereas padding is only, margin is only used for text, and it's a little, I'd rather just use the padding for everything instead of using margin specifically just for a text block. You can also change the line height percentage. I'll get to that later. Color and opacity, let's make this black, and we can change the font over here. We can change the Roboto Tiny, Druid Sans Mono, or you can import your own font. Typeface, you can change it from bold, regular, etc. Types, size, I'm going to change this to 28. I personally like that better. Font material, we're not going to be using a font material, so screw that. We can give it an outline. So right now the outline is black, so you can't really see a difference, well, between the text and the outline. But if we change this to white, outline color for some reason is not showing up. There it is. You can see we can give it a white outline. I'm going to change this back to black, and I'm not going to give it an outline. And we can give it a shadow offset. Right now, even though there is a shadow offset, we can't see anything. That's because the shadow color, the alpha of it is 0, so we gave it up to 1, and we change the color to say white. You can see it has a white shadow now. Again, I'm not going to be using a shadow, so get rid of that. And this is very misleading. Auto wrap text. This doesn't actually automatically wrap it. I'm not sure why this is here, but it doesn't actually do anything as far as I know. So if we were to make this text longer, to say something like this cannot continue, and just copy and paste this for a bit. Copy, paste, 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 paste. You'll notice that it goes over the text and it just keeps going to the right. If we click on this auto wrap text, nothing happens. In order to make it wrap, we have to go down to wrapping auto wrap text, check that box, and that'll actually make it wrap. We can also choose specifically where to wrap it, but I prefer to just auto wrap it because it's easier. There's a couple things. We're not going to be using a tooltip for this, and we want to set the visibility to hit test invisible. The difference between visible and hit test invisible is that visible allows you to click on it, and it allows the cursor to know that you're over it. That's going to be a problem if there's anything underneath this text that we have to click on. So we're going to change it to hit test invisible, where the cursor is basically not aware of this widget. So if there's a button underneath it or something, we can't click on it. I believe setting it to hit test invisible actually saves on performance a little bit. I'm not too certain about that, but it's just nice to do in any case. So let's compile and save this. We're also going to want this text block to be a variable, so let's check this variable up here because we want to modify the text. And let's change the name of this text block to be something like dialog text. Sure. We don't need to do anything with the border, and let's make a slot also for the speaker's name. So let's add another border. Size it right, something like that. Move it down here. Sure. Actually, let's make it a little bit closer. And I want it to be the same color as our other border, so here's something cool we can do. We can click on this border, go to our brush color, right click this, copy it, go to this border, and paste it. So now they're the same color. Add a text to that. And I want to also make this text black with a size of 28. And I want this to be in the center of this text block. So to do that, we can go to our slot, horizontal alignment, click the center one, vertical alignment, click the center one. That'll center that text, and this is going to be our speaker name. We also want this to be a variable because we want to change it. And I also want this box to be a variable too. I'm going to make this a little smaller actually. I also want this block to be a variable because I want this to go invisible when there is no speaker. So let's change this to speaker box border. Speaker border. There we go. I'll save this. One more thing we need our buttons. We need our option buttons when they pop up and we can click on them and stuff. So let's do that. Let's go to user created, and if we drag in our buttons right here, we see that nothing appears because there's nothing in our button. So let's edit that actually. I'll save this first. Go back to our dialog options, and we can get rid of this canvas panel. I'm not going to explain why because it would take too long. So let's add a button instead. Now you notice that this takes up the entirety of the screen of this. That's because there is no canvas. If there was a canvas panel, it would be a regular size thing. Actually, let me show you that. I can right click on this, wrap with canvas panel, and you notice that the button goes back to normal size. However, like I said, we really don't need the canvas panel, and you want to have as many, you want to have as few widgets on screen as possible, just for performance sake. And since we don't need the canvas, let's get rid of it. If you want to change what the button looks like, you can go over to Appearance, Style, and change the images. So the normal, when you're not hovered over it or anything, that would be this one. The hovered is when you're hovering over the button. Pressed is when you press the button and you're holding onto the pressing down button, pressing it down. And disabled is when you can't click the button at all. So let's add a text to our button. This text is, let's make it text size 28, text color will be black, and let's center it. Sure, that works for me. Compile, save this, and if we go back to our dialog, you'll notice that it doesn't take up the entire screen because there is no canvas of this button. So we can resize this to be anything we want, and the text box stays centered. Now what we could do is we could just have a bunch of buttons in here and we could just, line them up as we need to, resize them, whatever. But that would be a huge pain, and if we're uncertain about the amount of buttons we need, it's gonna cause problems for us. So instead, let's actually just move these to the side. Instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna procedurally create our buttons as we need them. So let's create an H box, a horizontal box for our buttons. That would be under panel, vertical box. Did I say H box? I might have said H box. Anchors, let's anchor it to the center, middle. Here we go. And the alignment is going to be, 0.5. So size X is going to be the width of our buttons. So whatever image you have for your buttons, how wide it is, that would be what this size X is. Let's go with something like 500. That's a little low. 1,000? Sorry, that's 100. 1,000? Sure. Yeah, 1,500. Alright, that's better. Off the top, how far away from the top it want to be? Let's go with 0. And also at bottom, it's just going to be at the top of this text block. Also position X, let's make this 0 so that it is centered. And if we take all our text buttons and we drag it underneath or into our vertical box, it's going to make it a children of the vertical box, which is going to make these automatically vertically line up underneath each other. However, you'll notice that they start from the top, and we want them to be centered instead. Like, no matter how many buttons we have, we want them to always be in the center. To fix that, we can add some spacers in between, or to the top and the bottom of these. So if we go to, primitives, spacer, put one on top of the dialog options and one on the bottom of the dialog options. And we set the size to fill. it's just going to take up as much space as possible. So the top one is taking up as much space as possible, and now the bottom one is taking up as much space as possible. So they're sort of pushing the the buttons to the center of this widget. So now if we get rid of some buttons, they stay centered, no matter how many we have. Okay, we're actually going to delete these because we want to procedurally create them as we go. And let's add another H box, or V box, I mean, in between these spacers. This is going to be our buttons box. This is buttons box is variable because we want to be able to interact with it. The reason we're doing this is because when we procedurally create our buttons, we don't want to have to manually keep putting them in between these spacers. So we're just going to put a VBox in between them to parent the buttons to instead. Alright, how do we get this on the screen? Well, let's go back to our level blueprint, and because I never actually saved the level and we're not using that same level as before, there's something in here. So let's get rid of this text because we're never going to use it. We are going to start dialog, choose the test DOG, our participants we have to make array, and we actually need a participant, so let's drag this in here and create reference. Here we go. After we start our dialog, we are going to create widget, and the widget we're going to create is our dialog widget. Compile, save that, sorry, not save that. And if we hit play, nothing happens. That's because we never added it to our screen, so drag off our widget and say add to viewport. Compile. Now if we hit play, it shows up. Very exciting. However, when it showed up, the text doesn't represent what the dialog is saying. So, sorry, don't do that. So we have to edit our functionality of our widget blueprint, our dialog widget. To do that, we can go to our graph button over here. This switches in between our designer view and our graph view. And we don't need our tick, and we don't need our preconstruct. Preconstruct is, yeah, there's no point in explaining it, so I'm not going to bother, since we're not using it. So event construct, however, is basically our begin play for our widgets. After it's created, this runs. So, well, in game, after this is created in game, this runs. The pre-construct is what happens when it's created in outside of game, in the dialog, or not dialog, in the widget editor. So event construct, what we want to do is, well, we need to know what the dialog context is. So let's make a new variable. Let's call this dialog context, and its type is going to be DLG context. Get our dialog context, and we are going to say, well, first off, is it valid? Because we don't want to bring up any errors. And if it is valid, what we're going to do is tell our dialog text to set the text, set text to be the context active node text. Here it is. Drag that in there. Actually, let's make another node just for this, just make it a little cleaner. And after we do that, we want to check to see if we have a player or not, if we have a speaker or not. If we do, we are going to set the name over here, and if we don't, we're going to make this invisible. So let's go to our dialog context and ask if there is a current participant. So participant, get active participant. If this is valid, So if it is valid, we're going to tell our speaker name, get speaker name, dot set text to be our active participants, get display name. This is not the dialog's get display name. You'll notice that this is just a generic get display name. That's because it doesn't, when we get our active participant, it just thinks it's an object reference. It doesn't know that it has it inherits from the DLG participant interface. So to let it know it does that, we have to cast to DLG dialog participant. Now there's no way that it's going to not be a DLG participant, so we can right click and convert this to a pure cast just to get rid of those execution pins, because otherwise we'd have to drag it in here, drag it in here, and it would just make it more cluttered than it needs to be. So instead, right click, convert to pure cast, and as a dialog participant we are going to get display name and drag that into our set text. Compile, save, and play. Nothing happens. That is because we do not know what our dialog context is. So in order to let our dialog widget know what the dialog context is, we can either go to our level blueprint and we could, after spawning it, we could set dialog context. However, that's going to be too late because we already created it, and once it's created, it runs the event construct. So instead, what we need to do is tell our dialog context that it is instance editable and it is exposed on spawn. Compile that. What that'll do is in our create widget, if we right click and refresh this node, there's now a slot for a dialog context. So we can plug in our context over here, and it should now know what our dialog context is. Sorry, I keep hitting save. Press play. Welcome to this tutorial. Welcome back to this tutorial. You'll notice that the speaker name, however, is blank. That's because in our participant, the get participant name over here is not the same as our get participant display name. There's actually a pretty good reason for that. Here, let me just fix this really quick. I'll make this Spheria. Compile, save, hit play, and now it says Spheria. Now let me explain the reason for this. Why get participant name and get participant display name is different. That's because sometimes you don't want the participant display name to be the same as our participant name. For example, in our DLG, let's say we have someone named, here, add speech. Let's say we have somebody named main character. You know, obviously you wouldn't want the display name to be main character. You'd want it to be that character's name. If you can't edit the character's name, then you would just change it from main character to be their actual name. However, if you can change the player's name, then instead of returning the participant, instead of returning the participant name, we want to return whatever the player set their name to be. So in this case, the participant name is going to be the same as our display name, but you know, there's cases where you wouldn't want it to be like that. So compile, save this. Now I believe I already showed you, if I hit play, for some reason that didn't work. Press play. Why is this not working now? I believe it worked earlier. At the viewport test make. Why is this not working now? Output log. Failed to start dialog. Ah, I know why. That's because back in our dialog, oh, please don't tell me it actually. Yeah, it did. Okay, so when I created that speech node with the name main character, it still thinks that main character is sticking around. It thinks that it needs somebody named main character, despite the fact that it doesn't. So to fix this, we could hit this reload dialog data from DLG text file with the same name in folder. Hit yes, and that'll mess up all our nodes. Wow, that did a really bad job of messing up our nodes. Let me fix this really quick. Sure, it still looks horrible, but it's better than earlier. we go back to our participants, you'll notice that there's no longer one for main character. So now if we play, it should be fine. Okay. This refresh node, by the way, in our... Actually, I'll talk about that later. So to prove that this works, let's change this speaker to be nobody. Save and hit play again. And you notice that this doesn't go away. That's because we never actually set up the functionality for that. So let's go to our dialog. If the participant is not valid, what we're going to do is we're going to tell our speaker border, get speaker border, to set visibility to be collapsed. Not visible, takes up no space in layout, can never be clicked on because it takes up no space. That's exactly what we want it to be. So set this to be collapsed. Compile, save, press play, and it no longer shows up. However, when we reach our next node, we do have a speaker, and it's not going to set the visibility back to visible, so we have to set that up over here in if it is valid. So if speaker, get speaker border, set visibility to hit test invisible. Here we go. And that should work for now. Alright. How do we get the text to move? How do we get the dialog to move on to the next node? Well, what we want to do is make it so that if you click anywhere on screen, then we move on to the next node. So let's add a button to our canvas. We're going to make the anchors fill the entire screen, and so we can set everything to just 0. So it fills up the entire screen. Change our buttons, where is it? I believe it's color and opacity. If we change this to 0, it doesn't work. Nope. It might be background color. Background color, alpha. Yeah, okay, so it's background color. Change background color, the alpha to 0, and it'll just be invisible. Change this button's name to click to continue. Compile, save that. And we will go down to the bottom here, events on clicked. We're going to click on this plus sign to add functionality to when this button is clicked. And when it is clicked, we're going to go to our dialog context, and we're going to tell it choose child 0. So we're just going to move on to the next node. And after we move on to the next node, we want to update our text and our speaker stuff again. So if we compile and save now and hit play, welcome to the tutorial, we click, our name shows back up because there's a speaker, and the text changed to have you made a visual novel before. Click again. Because we choose option 0, even though there were 2 choices, it chose the first one, so it moved on to the yes option, which is excellent. Hope you enjoy making visual novels with Unreal 4. Click again, who is best girl? Choose option 0, that will be L2. That show got really bad at the end, QQ, and we hit the end. Now, you'll notice that the widget stayed up and everything still thinks it's running, despite the fact that we reached the end. So over here, after we choose child, it's going to return a boolean, true if the dialog did not end, false otherwise. So we want to branch on this. So if it is true, if we did not end the dialog, then we're just going to keep going. Otherwise, if it's false, we're going to remove from parent. And the thing we're going to remove is ourself, this dialog widget. Compile, save that, let's try that again. Click, 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 and it goes away. I'm not sure why it returned true despite the fact that we reached the end over here. Oh, that's because this actually is something, it had no text. For some, let's give this a text so it makes it more visible. That we actually did not end yet. Let's say something like, hope this tutorial helped. Save this. Now if we play, click, 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 who's best girl, that show got really bad. Hope this tutorial helped. Click again, it ends. Oh, which it goes off the screen. Okay. Now you have noticed during that clicking that we never actually showed our options. So let's do that. Dialog options, yep, we have that all set up. After we set our text and show our names and stuff, let's show our buttons. So instead, let's go to a sequence node. Sequence, this is just going to do stuff in an order. So first, we are going to set our text and names and stuff like that. Up here. And then we are going to make our options. So actually, we're going to need a for loop. I just know that, so ahead of time. How many options are we going to need? To find out how many options we need, let's go to our dialog context, get option num. I'm going to -1 because this is an inclusive for loop. -1, and plug that into last index. And in this for loop, we're just going to spawn a button for every option we have. So loop body, we're going to spawn or create widget. That widget is our dialog options, and we're going to add it to our buttons box. Get our buttons box, add child. Compile, save this. If we try doing this now, welcome back to this tutorial. That's a button shows up. That's because we actually do have a option. When we start, there's always going to be at least one option. This first option is going to head here, and over here we have 3 options. So instead of just checking, instead of just adding buttons for each option, we're going to say if our option num is greater than 1, integer greater than 1, then we're going to add our buttons. Branch. Otherwise, we're just not going to do anything. Press play again. There's no button. Click. Have you made a visual novel before? And nothing shows up. Why is this? Get option num if it's greater than 1. It should be greater than 1. Hold on. Is this actually running? Press play. If you want to debug an object, by the way, you can go to node debug option selected. Click this. Choose whatever object you want to debug, and you can actually see the execution lines being run during runtime. So if we click here, we branch to I know why. So after we choose our child, we're moving immediately to our set text instead of the sequence node. So we're never actually reaching this branch again. So instead of going to our set text, we go to our sequence. That should solve our problem. Press play, go into the tutorial, and now we get 2 options. However, the text is completely wrong, and we can't actually click on them. So let's fix that. First, the clicking issue. If we go back to our designer, you'll notice that this click to continue is above everything else. So that means it's above our options as well. If we just drag this behind our options, behind this vertical box that holds our buttons box, compile, save, hit play again, you'll notice that when we hover over our buttons, we can actually interact with them now. Clicking on them doesn't do anything, however. Also, whenever we click outside of buttons, it still thinks we choose option 0. It still knows that we clicked that button. So instead of just automatically choosing a child, instead we're going to take our dialog context, say get option num, and we're going to ask if this is equal to 1. Equal 1. So if we only have one option, meaning if there's no choices for our player to make, then we choose option 0. Compile, save, play that, and clicking outside these buttons no longer does anything when we have choices. Okay, now to fix the issue with our buttons not knowing what to say and not doing anything. We go back to our dialog options, make sure this text block is a variable, so we can change it. Get rid of preconstruct, get rid of indent tick, get our text block. We're going to set this text to set text. And that text is going to be something. We don't know what yet, so let's make another variable. This is going to be our text. We're going to make this a text variable, and we're just going to plug our text in here. Again, to expose this to our dialog widget, we're going to have to make sure it is instance editable and expose on spawn. So compile, save this, go back to our dialog, refresh our create W dialog options widget because it's not showing up. So right click, refresh nodes, and now the text shows up. That text is going to be our dialog context. Sorry, don't set that. Make sure you don't set it. Get it. And get option text, I believe. Yes, get option text. And the option index is going to be whatever we're looping, what number loop we're on. So now if we hit play, welcome to this tutorial, and now we have yes and no. Really quick, you'll notice that we don't get our, where is it? We don't get our you cannot select me option. That's because we're not using the get option text from all, and we're not getting the option num from all. So let's fix that really quick. Instead of using option, or actually, let's make a bool first. So show unselectable options. This is going to be a boolean. Boolean is just yes or no. Before I forget, because I know I'm going to forget later, I'm going to make sure this is true so we can check this. Get this. And instead of just passing in our get option num immediately into this branch, we're going to click from here and we're going to click and drag from there, and we're going to say select. We're going to select a integer instead, based off show unselectable options. So if this is true, we are instead going to get option num, or get all option num. There it is. So that's if it's true, and if it's false, we are going to get option num. Let's make this a little prettier. We also have to use this number instead for the last index. Compile, save that. And over here, instead of get option num, we should get show selectable options, select. If it's false, we will just get option num. If it's true, we will get option num. Okay. Is there any other instances that we have to change? Yes, over here. Instead of getting option text, let's make another select. Show unselectable options over here. This is going to be false, and for the true, we will get option text from all. And our index goes over here. Compile, save, play this now, and you notice that we have the you cannot select me option. Now, actually we never set what happens when we click on these buttons, so let's do that really quick before I go into the next topic of making it so it's unselectable. Back in our options dialog options, in our button, if we click on the plus sign next to onClicked, we can add functionality. And what are we going to do when we click? Well, we're going to have to tell our dialog context to choose an option number, and then we're going to have to tell it to update the text and stuff. So to do that, let's add a custom event. Add custom event. Let's call this choose option. and it's going to take in an integer. This integer is going to be what option we choose. So integer option number, or option index, let's call it. Compile, save. Back in our dialog options, we actually don't know where our context or our widget is, so let's actually give that a variable. Plus variable. This is going to be our widget, our dialog widget. Its type is going to be W dialog object reference. Here we go. And we want to tell it to choose option, and we don't know what number we are either, so let's give it a number. This is going to be our option index integer, and we're going to give it our option index. We want both our dialog widget and our option index to be exposed on spawn so that we can, know where they are. Expose on spawn. Compile, save. Back to our dialog. When we create our option widget, right click and refresh this node. Our dialog widget is just going to be ourself, and our option index is going to be this index in our for loop. Okay, so now if we compile, save this. I forgot to actually add functionality to this choose option. Get our dialog context, choose child. However, if we're showing unselectable options, get show unselectable options, instead we're going to branch over here. So if we're not showing unselectable options, we're just going to choose child, and that child is, index is going to be option index. Otherwise, we are going to choose child based on all options. And option index goes over here. Either way, after we've chosen an option, we will go back to this sequence. Here we go. Compile, save this. Hit play. And if we hit yes, it moves on. Excellent. Hope you enjoyed making visual novels on UE4. If we hit no, that's too bad. Hope this series doesn't scare you off. And if we stop showing unselectable options, compile, save, the unselectable option no longer shows up. You'll notice that the buttons still stick around though after we click a button, so let's fix that. How about in the sequence node, let's add a pin. Before we do anything, we want to hide all our options. So our new 0 is going to be a for loop. Sorry, break this. Index 0, we're going to get our buttons box, get child num, child count. Here it is, -1, because the for loop is inclusive, which annoys me to no end. And we're just going to go through each of our children in our buttons box. Get buttons box dot get child at the index of our for loop. Set visibility to be hidden. Sorry, not hidden, collapsed. A hidden object will still occupy layout space, and we don't want it to do that. So collapsed. Compile, save, press play again. Welcome back to this tutorial. Have you made a visual novel before? Yes, and the buttons go away. Now we have more buttons. However, here's a problem. If we go to our dialog options and we choose our debug options, you'll notice that we have 5 buttons created. That's because instead of using, well, we have 5 buttons created and we only have 3 options. That's because the 2 buttons from our last round of questioning still exist. And instead of just keep making buttons every time we need them, we want to reuse our old buttons. Otherwise in a really long script, we might end up with like 100 buttons that are just sitting around not doing anything. So instead of just automatically creating a button over here in our loop body, what we're going to do is we're going to do a branch and that condition is going to be if our index is less than the dialog context, or if it's less than what is it? Our buttons box. If it's less than the number of children in a button box, so get children count. And plug this in here. So basically what we're going to say is if the current index is less than the number of children we have, so if we still have buttons that we can use, then we're just going to update the text of those buttons instead, the text and the index of those buttons instead. Otherwise, we have to create new buttons. So in our false, we can go to the create button widget, or create, yeah. And in our true, we are instead going to get our buttons box, get child at the index, and we have to cast to option, our dialog option. Also, because when we get our child, it just thinks it's a widget option. It doesn't know that it's a dialog options, because our buttons box can contain anything. It doesn't have to just contain a option, dialog option. So we have to cast to that to know what it is. And here we will set our option index to be our index. And we need to set the text to be our text as well. So as options, we are going to get the text block 0, and we're going to tell it to set text to be this over here. Because that's the way we're going to be using the same text if we're creating the widget or if we're just updating it. Also, we need to set its visibility to be true. So set visibility to be visible. Compile, save, press play. Go into the tutorial, yes. Now we have 3 buttons here, and we only have 3 buttons created. Excellent. One more issue we have to go through first. When we show our unselectable options, compile, save, press play, you'll notice that we can still click on this unselectable option. Nothing happens, but if we go to our output log, we're getting a bunch of errors because, well, we can't enter this. We can't enter this node. It's just not possible for us to do. So it's just giving us errors instead of moving on. So we want to make it so that we can't actually click on that button. So let's move these to the side, or yeah, let's move these to the side. Actually, and we're going to do another sequence node. Move it over here. New body sequence. So first we're going to either update the text of the button or create the button, and then after that we are going to, in our buttons box, get child at index, and we are going to set its set is enabled. Okay, that doesn't tell us what enable does, but here. If you go back to our dialog options, go back to the designer viewport, click on our button, hover over is enabled. Excuse me. It sets whether this widget can be modified interactively by the user. Basically, if the user can interact with it or not. And if the option is unselectable, then we obviously want this to be false. If it is selectable, we want it to be true. So how are we going to do that? We're going to get our dialog context, and we're going to ask if option is satisfied. Yeah, is option satisfied? And we're going to pass in our index, and we're going to pass this bool into here. Now, we're actually only going to do this if we are showing unselectable options, because if we aren't showing unselectable options, then obviously each of them are going to be satisfied, so we're going to want them to be enabled. So set unstable options, branch this. We only want this to happen if we are showing unselected options. Compile, save. Now if we hit play, you'll notice that we can't select this middle option. Hit Shift F1 to, oh, that is not what I wanted to do. Shift F5 to bring, nope. Never mind. Screw that. But point is, you notice that we can't click this anymore. Hit no. And, I actually thought there would be an error there. Why was there no error? Damn it. Sorry, forget I cursed just now. Say yes. This should be unselectable. Hold on. Let me dialog options. Select option 1, I believe. Is this enabled? It's weird. Oh well, if it works, it works. What I thought would happen was that when we hit play and this option 1 right here is not enabled right now. So I thought what would happen is when we go to the next one and it's using the same button, it would still be unenabled, but apparently it isn't. But hey, that's good for us, I guess. Less work for us to do. What else do we want to do before we end this video? When we go to the very end, hope this tutorial helped. We keep going, and actually, did I already do that? Oh, I already removed it from parent. Never mind. Alright, I guess that'll do it for this video. In the next video, we're going to be making the text type itself out, because right now it's kind of boring to look at. And I hope to see you then. Hopefully I didn't make too much of a mess of this video and make it more confusing.